not to religion, but from it. Earlier this month I spoke to Richard Dawkins, science ambassador, evolutionary biologist, and prophet to atheists. He did not mince his words. Richard Dawkins, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
I suppose we should start off by asking, why atheism?
Well, atheism is a realistic view of the universe and the world. And we live in a society, especially perhaps in Ireland, not only in Ireland, but it is perhaps true of Ireland, we live in a society which is dominated by a superstitious view of the world, which goes back not very far in history, actually. We don't think about how long history is, but it's historical that many of our societies, including the Irish society, are dominated by a superstitious worldview that has no basis in reality. That's very sad.
When you say superstitious, you're talking about all major religions?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, believing in the supernatural when we have natural means of explaining things which are ready and available and extremely powerful.
Why are you so passionate about atheism, Richard? I suppose it's a question that a lot of people ask why religious leaders are so fervent about passing their message on to the masses. Why have you become sort of a prophet for atheists?
Because I believe in truth, and I think the truth is wonderful. The truth, as we now understand it in the 21st century, is even more wonderful than it was before we understood it in earlier centuries. And so it's a tragedy if people are brought up, as children especially, being indoctrinated with medieval falsehoods.
Do you think that atheism as a concept suffers from a bit of negative press, that people see atheism as a lack of faith?
Yes, I think there is a danger of that, because the very word atheism is a negative word, so we want to put a more positive spin on it and say that this is a positive view of the world in which we live, a genuine attempt to understand it with the best means at our disposal to understand it, which is science. And so it's immensely positive. I mean, it's so exciting to understand how the world works. It's also sort of reassuring in a way to say this is the one life we've got. We're not going to live after we're dead. And so that's just wishful thinking. And so really make the most of your life. Don't mess around brooding over a possible future life. There isn't going to be one. Live your life to the full now, here and now. It's worth it. It's great. Live it now. And don't delude yourself with the futile hope of a future life.
What's the problem that you have with religion, though? I mean, studies have shown that faith in God is good for your health. And even there's a study only a couple of weeks ago that showed that football players who prayed before a match actually turned out better performers. And I know that's probably down to placebo, but if someone has a faith in it, it isn't hurting them. Why is the problem?
Well, I mean, that evidence is disputed, but even if it wasn't, I'd be fully prepared to believe it. The placebo effect is very powerful, and doctors have shown this again and again. If you want to get consolation from a falsehood, and if you want to become a better football player by believing in a falsehood, you're welcome. I prefer the truth.
We asked some of our followers on Twitter to suggest some questions. They were very excited that we were going to be speaking to you. And one person asked a question which I thought was quite interesting. Why have you chosen in your public engagement to follow what would be seen as quite a confrontational approach to interviewing? I've watched some of the videos that you have, and studies would suggest that a more subtle approach to interviewing these people would garner better results.
It's very variable. I think you get a sort of warped impression from some interviews. Some interviews do arouse anger because they are, for example, interviewing somebody who is an educator, a teacher, or a head teacher, say, who is busy inculcating falsehood into the minds of children. I mean, I think that's a form of mental child abuse. And wouldn't you get angry at that?
Do you worry about offending people who have a faith?
Religious people are much too sensitive. They treat an attack on their religion as a sort of personal insult, as though they got an ugly face or something. I mean, it is just a difference of opinion about the world, about the universe, about the way it is. People shouldn't be so touchy. And actually, the reason they think I'm aggressive is that they hear it through ears which are tuned to the presumption that religion gets a free pass, that one doesn't attack religion, and therefore if you say anything even mild about it, it's seen, it's heard, as though it was a furious attack, which it usually isn't.
Well, modern society and culture is rigged to sort of preserve and support religion, isn't it?
Very much so, and I think that's what's happening, is that because of that, if you say something really quite mild, which would be taken as extremely mild if it were, say, in a political context, or, I don't know, theatre criticism or book criticism or something, it would be taken as extremely mild. But because it's religion, it sounds, oh dear, he's attacking religion, you can't do that. Well, you can do that, and you should.
In this country, we have a lot of practicing Roman Catholics, but we have, I would imagine, a much larger percentage of those who are born into the faith and check the box every year when the census comes around. Although we found when the most recent census came around that their mums were checking Roman Catholic for them. Do you have a major problem with that?
I have a huge problem if their mothers are checking for them. I mean, that is just wicked. And it doesn't surprise me in the very least, but there are certainly censuses are extremely likely to be misleading because people do tend to tick the box that they were brought up in and not actually think, do I actually believe this? Do I really seriously believe that first century Jew was born from a virgin, died and came back from the dead 3 days later? Of course I don't believe that. But I tick Roman Catholic because that's how I was brought up.
I got in trouble on a program before by saying that we are not in a Catholic country. We're in a country where there are a majority of Catholics. Is it difficult in a country like ours where Catholicism is sort of intertwined with our culture to be able to separate it in people's minds? If you criticize Catholicism in this country, you're seen as criticizing what it is to be Irish.
Well, I think that's very sad if that's so, because there's so much more to being Irish, and the best of being Irish is anything but being Catholic.
What's the best argument you've ever heard for a deity or for a god? You must have interviewed so many people who have a staunch faith. Did anyone come close to convincing you?
No, I don't think there is a good argument. If I was forced to say what's the best argument, it would probably be something to do with the fine-tuning, the apparent alleged fine-tuning of the universe. But note that there are various reasons for thinking that's a bad argument. Even if it was a good argument, it most certainly would not be a good argument for a particular god who was born of a virgin, is a 3-in-1, whatever that means, transubstantiates himself into a wafer or wine. There's absolutely nothing to do with that, and it's all too easy to go from a scientific argument, a quasi-scientific argument, like the fine-tuning argument, to say, okay, well, that seems to mean there might be some sort of a god. Okay, well, he must have been born of a virgin, he must have risen after 3 days, he must have turned water into wine, he must turn himself into a wafer, which, of course, doesn't follow at all.
I find it quite interesting that a lot of the media outlets have great fun in pouring scorn over Scientology, and yet, if you look at the two stories of Christianity and Scientology, there's some pretty way-out ideas in both.
That's absolutely right. I mean, the only thing about Scientology is that it's recent, and so you can actually see how it was invented by one man. In his case, he even admitted he was inventing it. But the thing about Christianity is that it goes back a few centuries, and so it's kind of sanctified by time, by history. In a way, it should be even the reverse, because the stories that are in the New Testament, which weren't written down until 30, 40 years after they're alleged to have happened, and then were handed down in all sorts of odd ways, the length of historical time that's elapsed should make that become less authentic, not more authentic, but in fact there's a sort of sanctification by tradition. So you tend to give Catholicism greater weight than Scientology, although both of them were just made up and both of them are based on nothing.
I'm going to ask you a question that I'm sure will annoy you now, but is atheism a faith in itself? I spoke quite recently to theoretical physicists, and I've written a book about all the ideas that we have out there for the possible computations for our universe, and some of them sounded quite difficult to get your head around, the idea that there are multiple universes and that we live in a universe that is mirrored infinitely across an unimaginable space. To have faith in something like that is akin to having faith in a deity, because we don't yet have the answer as to whether or not there is a God, and we don't have the answer as to whether or not we have multiple universes.
I'm at a disadvantage with physics because I'm a biologist, but I think there's a huge difference between having faith, which is belief without evidence, and having belief with evidence. Now, something like multiple universes, that's not proved, but it is a hypothesis which does enable you to understand certain things in a coherent way. And so it's a legitimate part of physics to postulate something like multiple universes, and you don't say, I believe in it, you say that if we postulate multiple universes, then such and such a thing follows, and that seems to fit the facts. Scientific knowledge is not anything to do with faith, because faith is belief without evidence. Now you can say something like, I have a strong hunch that such and such will prove to be the case, and that governs the kind of experiment that I do. But finally, science doesn't sign up to something as being true until it's been verified, demonstrated by experimental observational work.
Some of the world's greatest scientists were also religious. Do you think science and religion now is incompatible?
Well, some of the world's greatest scientists have been religious in historical times, certainly people like Newton and Faraday, and much less so since the time of Darwin. Newton lived before Darwin. I cannot believe Newton would have believed in God if he lived after Darwin. So that's, I suppose, the main thing to say. There are some scientists who claim to be religious still today. Usually, if you ask them closely what they believe, it turns out that they feel vaguely spiritual, or they say something deeply mysterious about the universe, and something, they may use a word like transcendent or something of that sort. If you say, do you believe in a personal God who forgives your sins and listens to your prayers, they say, of course not.
You are, of course, primarily a noted evolutionary biologist, and this is something we've written about and worked on for a number of years. Does it annoy you when it's called the theory of evolution?
It doesn't exactly annoy me. It's just that it's very much misunderstood, because people, there's a kind of layman's use of the word theory to mean tentative hypothesis, as in only a theory. And that's just a different usage of the word theory. So I think it's probably, I wouldn't use the word annoy, but I think it would probably be rather a good thing if we stopped talking about the theory of evolution, because it's just begging to be misunderstood. People are eager to misunderstand it. What we should talk about is the fact of evolution, because it is a fact.
Your work has also involved a huge amount of science communication. What do you think your biggest challenge is in communicating science to the masses?
I'm an evolutionary biologist, and that puts me in a relatively easy position compared to my physics colleagues, who have a really hard time, because relativity, quantum theory, and various aspects of modern physics are extremely difficult for the human mind at all to understand. Evolution is not that difficult to understand. It's not profoundly difficult in the way that, say, quantum theory is. There are difficulties. You have to get your mind around huge spans of time, because evolution takes tens of millions, hundreds of millions of years, and that's not a time span that most people can grasp. And so you'll hear people saying, well, I believe in evolution when I see a monkey give birth to a human, or something like that, showing a total lack of understanding of the immensities of time involved. So that's one problem. I think another problem is that people are so used to the idea that complexity and things that look designed, in our human world, they are designed. Things like clocks and cars and computers. So it requires a bit of a leap to realize, well, this is why it took so long. This is why Darwin didn't arrive on the scene until the mid-19th century, because although the idea, once he had it, is actually very simple, people have difficulty believing it's possible that something so simple as natural selection could give rise to the immense complexity of a brain or a kidney or an eye.
If there was a God, do you think he'd believe in Richard Dawkins?
I don't answer facetious questions like that.
Richard Dawkins, thank you very much for joining us on the program.
Okay, thanks very much.